17 black actresses who were the worst drug addicts in Hollywood. Hollywood loves black women when they're winning, but stays silent when they're breaking. Behind the red carpets and perfect smiles were nights of pressure, loneliness, and addictions the cameras never filmed. In this video, we're exposing the documented truth about 17 black actresses whose battles with drugs nearly destroyed their lives and legacies, not for gossip, but for honesty. If you believe real excellence includes the parts Hollywood tries to hide, you're in the right place. This is the Black Excellence List. Subscribe, hit the like button, and comment your thoughts, because these stories deserve to be heard. Tamara Dobson. Tamara Dobson didn't enter Hollywood quietly. She arrived like a thunderclap. Standing over 6 feet tall with model poise and fearless presence, she shattered expectations in Cleopatra Jones' 1973, becoming one of the earliest black female action heroes to command the big screen. At a time when black actresses were rarely allowed power or dominance on screen, Dobson looked unstoppable. The film's success made her feel like a cultural shift was finally happening, as if the industry had opened a door that could never close again. But Hollywood's support proved fragile. When the blaxploitation wave faded, so did the phone calls. Contracts disappeared, studios moved on, and the woman once praised as a breakthrough was quietly sidelined. Cut off from opportunity, isolation set in. Friends later recalled that alcohol and prescription medication became coping mechanisms, not for fun, but for survival. She wasn't chasing a high. She was trying to silence the feeling of being discarded after being celebrated. How many pioneers get applauded for changing the game only to be abandoned when the trend ends? As the years passed, Dobson became harder to spot in public, and when she resurfaced, observers noticed how much she had changed. The once mythic figure looked frail, like someone carrying pain the cameras could never capture. Behind the scenes, her struggles grew heavier as serious health problems entered the picture. She was later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a disease that can weaken the body over time, stealing strength, movement, and independence. In the final chapter, Tamara Dobson's story stopped being about fame and became about survival. Financial pressure reportedly forced her to sell memorabilia from Cleopatra Jones, a painful reversal for someone who once headlined premieres. She spent her last years far from Hollywood's spotlight and died in 2006 at age 59. Her legacy still inspires, but her downfall is a warning. Addiction isn't always the headline, sometimes it's the evidence. Pam Grier. Pam Grier didn't just become famous, she became a revolution on screen. In the early 1970s, when Hollywood rarely allowed black women to lead action films, she exploded into the spotlight with Coffee 1973 and Foxy Brown 1974. She wasn't cast as a side character or a victim. She was the main force, fearless, stylish, and dangerous in a way audiences had never seen before. Her films made serious money and turned her into the face of a cultural shift, proving black women could carry a movie and dominate the frame. But the same era that crowned her also carried a hidden cost. The industry around her was built on late nights, relentless schedules, and an entertainment culture where substance use was treated like normal pressure relief. Pam later acknowledged that she was exposed to that environment during the peak of her fame, when exhaustion and expectations were constant, and personal stability was harder to protect. In a world that demanded strength from black women, Hollywood offered applause, but not real care. Over time, the consequences appeared in ways the public didn't see. Pam has spoken about serious reproductive damage and infertility, a private loss that cut deeper than losing roles or status. Careers can be rebuilt, but some dreams cannot be restored. That reality became part of the price she paid for surviving an era that pushed artists to keep going, even when their bodies were quietly breaking. What separates Pam Grier from many tragedies is that she lived long enough to reclaim control. She stepped away from destructive habits, rebuilt discipline, and refused to let addiction become the final headline of her name. Then in 1997, Quentin Tarantino cast her in Jackie Brown, restoring her to critical acclaim and proving her legacy was bigger than any dark chapter. Pam Grier's story isn't just about addiction. It's about endurance, truth, and how pioneers often suffer in silence while the world celebrates the image they created. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge wasn't just a star, she was history in motion. In 1954, her performance in Carmen Jones earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, making her the first black woman ever recognized at that level. For millions of people, it felt like a door had finally opened. She was elegant, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. But Hollywood's praise came with a cruel limitation. They celebrated her image while refusing to offer roles equal to her talent, especially in stories where she could be loved, protected, or treated as fully human. Behind the spotlight, Dorothy's life became a battlefield of pressure and pain. Her personal relationships were unstable. Her finances were often controlled by others, and she carried the emotional weight of raising her daughter Harolyn, who lived with severe developmental disabilities. The world demanded perfection while offering almost no support. Over time, alcohol and prescription sedatives became her escape, not for fun, but to numb exhaustion, grief, and loneliness. How do you survive being called a trailblazer when the industry still refuses to let you truly live? By the early 1960s, the cracks were visible. Missed performances, mounting debt, and emotional collapse replaced red carpets and headlines. Friends described mood swings and withdrawal, and biographical accounts later documented a growing dependence on substances during her most fragile years. Hollywood moved on quickly, and the woman who once symbolized progress was left fighting her private battles in silence. On September 8, 1965, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her West Hollywood apartment at just 42 years old. Her death was linked to a fatal combination of substances, closing a chapter that should have been the beginning of something bigger. Dorothy's legacy still echoes through every black actress who came after her, but her ending remains a warning in Hollywood. Breaking barriers doesn't guarantee safety. Sometimes it simply makes the fall more lonely and more forgotten. Tina Turner. Hollywood loves to sell Tina Turner as pure triumph, but her story is sharper when you look at what fame could hide. On stage, she was volcanic music movement and a fearless aura that made audiences believe she was untouchable. Offstage, her world was controlled, surveilled, and battered by a machine that demanded performances no matter the cost. In her own memoirs and interviews, Tina described years of abuse and relentless touring that crushed sleep safety and identity. In that environment, substances weren't framed as party culture. They became a way to keep going, to numb fear, to survive the next night. If you had to choose between collapsing in private or smiling on stage, what would you do? That's the trap the public rarely sees, especially for black women expected to be endlessly strong. Her breaking point wasn't a tabloid moment. It was a human one. Tina has spoken about a suicide attempt involving prescription pills, a signal that the pain had outgrown the persona. And when she finally fled in 1976, she didn't escape with riches or protection. She escaped with almost nothing, leaving money behind just to reclaim her name and her life. The comeback years later were historic, but they were built on scars, not fairy dust. Tina Turner's legacy isn't addiction, it's survival with receipts. Her story asks us to look past spectacle and ask why an industry can applaud the performance, yet still fail to protect the person doing the performing. Natalie Cole. Natalie Cole was born into musical royalty, but fame arrived with a weight few people could carry. As the daughter of Nat King Cole, every note she sang was measured against a legend before she ever had the chance to define herself. When she broke through in the mid-1970s with hits like This Will Be, she didn't just succeed, she dominated, winning multiple Grammy Awards before turning 30 and proving her talent was undeniable. Behind the polished image, pressure, and unresolved grief were quietly shaping a dangerous path. Natalie later confirmed in her memoir, that she was first exposed to heroin and cocaine while in college long before the public saw any cracks. As expectations grew, so did her dependence. Drugs became less about rebellion and more about escape from comparison, from fear, from the question of whether she would ever be enough on her own. How do you build an identity when the world insists you live inside someone else's shadow? That question followed her into every studio and every tour stop. By the early 1980s, the consequences were impossible to hide. Her addiction affected her health, her reliability, and her career momentum. In May 1983, Natalie nearly died from an overdose in Los Angeles and had to be revived by emergency medical staff. That moment marked a documented turning point. She entered rehabilitation and began a long, uneven fight for sobriety, choosing survival over denial, while the industry waited to see if she would disappear. Natalie Cole did come back powerfully. Her 1991 album, Unforgettable, with Love sold over 7 million copies worldwide and earned 6 Grammy Awards, restoring both her career and public trust. But she was honest about the cost. Doctors later linked her heart and kidney problems to years of substance abuse. When she died in 2015, her story stood as a reminder that recovery doesn't erase consequences. Natalie Cole's legacy is not failure. It is proof that talent can survive addiction even when the body pays a lasting price. Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg's rise to greatness looked effortless, but the truth is she was fighting a private battle long before the world truly understood her brilliance. Before she became an Oscar-winning icon, Whoopi came up through raw experimental theater, performing with fearless honesty, carrying the kind of talent that couldn't be ignored. When The Color Purple 1985 turned her into a household name and earned her an Academy Award nomination, it seemed like Hollywood had discovered a once-in-a-generation star. But behind the applause, Whoopi was still carrying insecurity pressure and emotional chaos that fame didn't magically erase. In her early years, Whoopi later admitted she struggled with substance abuse, including drug use, that became part of her routine during the grind of performing and surviving the entertainment world. It wasn't framed as glamour, it was escape. The stage demanded energy, confidence, and control, even when her mind was exhausted and her life felt unstable. People around her noticed the strain, intense mood shifts, physical burnout, and a hidden tension behind the jokes. What makes Whoopi's story powerful is that she recognized the danger before it stole her future. Instead of waiting for a scandal or collapse, she chose self-awareness and discipline, stepping away from the lifestyle that could have destroyed her career before it truly began. That decision didn't just save her image, it saved her life direction. She rebuilt her foundation while her fame was still rising, which is rare in an industry that often rewards denial. After that turning point, Whoopi's career became historic. In 1991, she won the Academy Award for Ghost, later earning the rare EGOT-level distinction across major entertainment platforms, proving she wasn't a temporary star, she was a permanent force. Her story isn't about downfall, it's about timing. Whoopi Goldberg shows what happens when truth beats pride, and when a person chooses recovery before the world even realizes they're in danger. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey is known today as the definition of control, calm voice, sharp mind, and unmatched emotional authority. But that polished image hides a chapter that could have ended her story before it ever truly began. Before the empire, before the billions, before the world called her the most powerful woman in media, Oprah was a young broadcaster carrying heavy trauma into an industry that didn't slow down for pain. She came from poverty, survived abuse, and entered television with ambition, but also with deep wounds that fame could not heal. In the early 1980s, while working in local TV, Oprah has spoken about being involved in a destructive relationship and a chaotic environment that pulled her toward harmful choices. This wasn't the glamorous side of celebrity, it was loneliness, emotional dependence, and a sense of being overwhelmed. At her lowest point, Oprah later admitted she came dangerously close to losing control of her life. How close do you think success can come to disappearing before the world ever even notices? That question sits at the center of her transformation because her greatest achievement wasn't becoming famous, it was choosing to survive. In 1983, just before her career breakthrough in Chicago, Oprah reached a private breaking point. She has described that moment as a wake-up call where she realized she had to cut ties with people and habits that were dragging her under. There were no tabloid headlines, no public arrests, and no televised breakdown, just a quiet decision to stop self-destructing. She chose discipline, structure, and self-respect before the public ever knew she was at risk. Then, the world watched the comeback without realizing it was already a rescue mission. AM. Chicago became the Oprah Winfrey Show, running for 25 years and reshaping American culture through conversation healing and storytelling. Oprah's story is proof that the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who pull themselves back from the edge before the fall becomes a funeral. Her control wasn't luck. It was a decision made in the darkest chapter. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston didn't just have a great voice. She had a voice that sounded like perfection. In the mid-1980s, she arrived like a once-in-a-generation miracle, and the numbers proved it. Her debut album became a global phenomenon, and she made history as the first woman to score 7 consecutive #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. To the public, Whitney looked untouchable, elegant, controlled, and blessed with a talent that made every note feel effortless. She wasn't only a superstar, she was the standard. But behind that flawless image, pressure kept piling up. Endless touring, brutal expectations, and the demand to stay perfect night after night created a kind of emotional strain most fans never saw. By the 1990s, her marriage to Bobby Brown added public turbulence to private exhaustion, and the world began watching the cracks form. Performances became unpredictable, interviews grew tense, and her health seemed to decline in front of millions. This wasn't built on rumors. Whitney's struggles became painfully confirmed through years of public concern and repeated attempts to get clean. Even when she returned with a comeback album in 2009, it was clear her body had already paid a heavy price. Still, her impact remained undeniable. Whitney sold over 200 million records worldwide, and her influence shaped an entire generation of singers. Fame kept her name shining, but it couldn't undo the damage that had been done behind closed doors. On February 11, 2012, Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a bathtub at the Beverly Hills Hotel. She was 48 years old. The official coroner's report ruled her death an accidental drowning with heart disease and drug use listed as contributing factors. Whitney will always be remembered for the voice that made the world stop and listen, but her ending remains a painful reminder that even legends can be broken by pressure exposure and a system that celebrates greatness without protecting the person carrying it. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan emerged in the 1970s as a force of nature, a voice so powerful and distinct that it reshaped the sound of R&B and funk almost overnight. As the lead singer of Rufus and later as a solo star, she delivered hits that sold millions of records and earned her a place among the most respected vocalists in American music. On stage, she appeared unstoppable, confident, glamorous, and fully in control. Behind the scenes, the pace of success carried a darker cost. Endless touring, late-night studio sessions, and an industry that never slowed down pushed Chaka into long-term substance abuse. In later interviews, she openly acknowledged struggles with cocaine and heroin during the late 1970s and early 1980s, describing a period when drug use was normalized and rarely challenged. When addiction is treated as part of the job, how long can anyone pretend it isn't destroying them? That question sits at the center of her story. By the mid-1980s, the consequences became impossible to ignore. Missed opportunities, health scares, and emotional collapse followed. Chaka has spoken candidly about overdoses and losing nearly a decade of her prime creative years to addiction. These weren't rumors or tabloid exaggerations. but admissions she later made herself, framing addiction as something that quietly hollowed out her momentum while the spotlight stayed fixed on her talent. Rehabilitation marked a turning point, not a miracle. Recovery was slow, disciplined, and often painful, but it allowed Chaka Khan to reclaim her voice and her life. She went on to earn 10 Grammy Awards and lasting respect across generations. Her legacy isn't defined by addiction, but by honesty. Chaka Khan's story reveals how brilliance can survive only when truth replaces silence and when recovery becomes a choice rather than a headline. Denise Katrina Matthews. Denise Katrina Matthews, known to the world as Vanity Rose in the early 1980s as a symbol of fearless glamour and raw confidence. Discovered and mentored by Prince, she became the face of Vanity 6, dominating pop culture with a provocative image that blurred the line between music, film, and celebrity power. To the public, she looked untouchable, bold, desired, and completely in command of the spotlight. Behind that image, her private life was sliding into dependency. Matthews later spoke about how heavy drug use escalated into crack addiction in the mid-1980s, fueled by non-stop nightlife, easy access, and a celebrity environment where boundaries were rarely respected. What started as fitting in quickly became survival, and survival became collapse. By the late 1980s, the consequences were brutal. Work opportunities dried up, relationships fractured, and repeated medical emergencies followed. Over time, Matthews developed severe kidney failure, a condition widely reported as connected to years of hard drug abuse, leaving her dependent on intensive treatment that reshaped her entire life. The contrast between the woman who once owned magazine covers and the woman fighting day by day to function was painful and permanent. In the 1990s, Denise made a hard break from the identity that made her famous. She renounced drugs, stepped away from the entertainment image, and embraced sobriety and faith publicly. Recovery gave her time, but it could not reverse the damage already done. She died in 2016 at age 57 from kidney failure. Her story isn't a tabloid punchline. It's a cautionary record of how addiction can dismantle a life in slow motion while the industry keeps the lights on and the camera rolling. Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah entered the spotlight as the definition of strength. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, she stood out in hip-hop with intelligence, confidence, and authority, pushing back against disrespect and proving a black woman could be bold without being broken. As her music career grew, she started expanding into acting, building a rare kind of credibility across multiple worlds. From the outside, everything looked solid, like she had her life under control while others were falling apart. Then tragedy hit. In March 1992, her older brother Lancelot Owens died in a motorcycle accident, and the loss shattered her foundation. Grief didn't just hurt, it rearranged everything. Latifah later admitted that she turned to alcohol and drugs during her darkest period, using them to numb pain she couldn't process publicly. The world expected her to remain strong, but strength without support can become a prison. How do you stay empowered in public when your private life collapses overnight? Throughout the 1990s, the struggle created real consequences. Friends described isolation, emotional withdrawal, and reckless behavior that didn't match the confident image fans knew. While her career didn't completely crash, her momentum slowed and opportunities didn't always land the way they should have. Addiction didn't steal her talent, but it threatened her focus, her stability, and her ability to trust herself. For someone known as a leader, losing control even briefly felt like a quiet humiliation. What separates Queen Latifah from many Hollywood tragedies is that she didn't let the detour become a destination. She reached a turning point before permanent damage could define her life. Therapy, sobriety, and family support gradually replaced self-destruction, and she rebuilt with intention instead of drama. By the late 1990s and beyond, she reestablished herself as a respected actress, producer, and cultural icon. Her legacy proves something powerful. Real strength isn't never breaking. It's having the courage to rebuild quietly, fully, and on your own terms. Mary J. Blige. Mary J. Blige didn't become the queen of hip-hop soul by accident. She earned that crown through raw truth. When she broke out in the early 1990s, her voice sounded like the inside of a storm heartbreak. Survival, anger, and hope all in the same breath. Albums like What's the 411 didn't just sell well. They changed R&B by blending street reality with deep emotion, creating a sound millions of people felt in their bones. She wasn't pretending to be perfect. She was turning pain into power. But that authenticity came from a real battlefield. Mary has spoken openly about her past, including trauma, instability, and emotional wounds that followed her into sudden fame. Success made her bigger, but it didn't make her safer. Under non-stop work and constant exposure, alcohol and drugs became coping tools instead of occasional escape. She admitted that during much of the 1990s, she was heavily dependent, sometimes recording while intoxicated, not because she wanted chaos, but because she didn't know how to quiet the hurt any other way. The consequences were disturbing even while the hits kept coming. Mary has said there are entire chapters of her career she barely remembers because substances blurred the years. Imagine being the voice of an era and losing pieces of your own life while the world celebrates you for being strong. Behind the scenes, people noticed exhaustion, emotional detachment, and moments where it looked like the pressure might finally win. Fame didn't stop the spiral, it only made it easier to hide. Her turning point came in the early 2000s when she chose sobriety therapy and self-reflection with real commitment. That decision didn't just save her health, it elevated her artistry. She went on to win multiple Grammy Awards, rebuild her image, and even earn an Academy Award nomination for Mudbound 2017, proving longevity is possible after collapse. Mary J. Blige is more than a survivor. She's proof that addiction didn't create the pain, it exploited it. And healing didn't erase her past. It turned it into a legacy that will never be forgotten. Jada Pinkett Smith. Jada Pinkett Smith entered Hollywood in the early 1990s with intensity, intelligence, and a fearless edge that set her apart. Roles in Menace, To Society, and Set It Off established her as a commanding presence at a young age, someone who projected control and confidence far beyond her years. To the public, she appeared disciplined and self-possessed, an actress firmly in charge of her image and career. Privately, that image masked a period of deep instability. In later interviews, Jada openly acknowledged struggling with heavy drinking, marijuana, and other substances in her 20s during a time when sudden fame collided with unresolved trauma and insecurity. Partying became routine, not occasional, and substances slowly structured her days rather than her goals. What happens when success arrives before emotional stability ever has a chance to form? That question defined her internal battle. The consequences surfaced quickly. Jada has described moments of shaking on set, emotional volatility, and fear that she was losing control of herself. During the filming of Set It Off, she later admitted she was in a fragile mental and physical state, convinced that continuing down the same path would end her life before the age of 25. These weren't rumors or tabloid claims, but reflections she shared herself years later with clarity and accountability. Motherhood became the turning point. The responsibility of raising children forced her to confront her behavior honestly and make lasting changes without public scandal or legal intervention. Jada chose sobriety therapy and discipline and has stated she has remained sober for over 2 decades. Her story is not one of downfall, but interruption. Addiction threatened to erase her future. Early yet self-awareness reclaimed it, proving that survival sometimes begins long before the world ever sees the damage. Naomi Campbell. Naomi Campbell didn't just break barriers in fashion, she shattered them with force. Rising in the late 1980s, she became one of the first black models to dominate luxury runways, major magazine covers, and global campaigns at a level the industry once tried to deny women who looked like her. By the early 1990s, Naomi wasn't only famous, She was everywhere, representing beauty, exclusivity, and power in a world that often treated Black women as exceptions rather than equals. From the outside, her life looked like non-stop victory. But behind that success was an exhausting reality. The fashion machine never stops brutal travel schedules, constant scrutiny, racism behind closed doors, and the pressure to stay flawless at all times. Naomi later admitted she struggled with substance abuse during her peak years, describing it as a way to cope with anger, loneliness, and emotional pain, rather than a glamorous lifestyle choice. Her battles didn't stay invisible. Public incidents, volatile behavior, and intense headlines began replacing the runway fantasy, and her reputation started taking hits that had nothing to do with her talent. Naomi also faced an important difference from many stars. She didn't deny it when it became obvious. She publicly acknowledged entering rehabilitation multiple times across the late 1990s and 2000s, showing that the struggle was real serious and not a rumor-driven narrative. Recovery wasn't quick, and it wasn't linear. But Naomi committed to therapy, accountability, and rebuilding her name beyond scandal. By the 2000s, she re-established herself not only as a supermodel icon, but as a respected veteran and mentor who still commands attention decades after her peak. Naomi Campbell's legacy is complicated but powerful. She exposed the cost of being first, being visible, and being constantly judged. And she proved that surviving addiction isn't just about quitting a habit, it's about reclaiming control in a system that profits from your image while ignoring your humanity. Stacey Dash. Stacey Dash became a pop culture obsession almost overnight. When Clueless, 1995, hit the world, her role as Dion made her instantly recognizable, sharp, stylish, and effortless in a way that defined an entire era. To audiences, she looked like someone living the dream beauty fame and a career that seemed built to last. But behind the camera-ready confidence was a life that had been marked by instability long before Hollywood ever called her name. Stacey has publicly admitted that her exposure to substance abuse started early. Growing up around addiction shaped her sense of normal, and by adulthood, dependency had shifted into prescription painkillers. She specifically revealed that she became addicted to Vicodin, describing a progression from occasional use into something that controlled her daily life. At her lowest point, Stacey said she was taking 18 to 20 pills a day, a shocking number that reflects how quickly prescription dependence can turn into survival mode instead of recreation. How do you build stability when addiction begins before your identity even fully forms? As her dependency deepened, the fallout hit. Everything: finances, relationships, and professional momentum. Stacey has described moments where her life felt completely out of control, including incidents that terrified her into realizing she might not make it if she didn't change. Unlike gossip-based celebrity narratives, this wasn't strangers talking. It was Stacey herself acknowledging how close she came to losing her future. For someone whose public image was built on looking flawless and unbothered, the private reality was the opposite: fear, shame, and the slow collapse of self-respect. Recovery didn't come overnight, and it didn't come without pain. Stacey entered treatment, faced the trauma she had been running from, and committed to getting clean. Her career never fully returned to the Clueless peak, but survival reshaped her priorities. Stacey Dash's legacy isn't about scandal, it's about how addiction can hide behind beauty and fame, especially when it starts young and goes unchecked. And her honesty is the reminder sometimes the most dangerous drugs aren't the ones people expect. They're the ones handed out with a prescription. Brandy Norwood. Brandy Norwood rose to fame in the mid-1990s as America's teenage sweetheart, carrying a level of visibility and expectation few young performers could withstand. With the success of Moesha and multi-platinum albums, she became a household name before adulthood had fully formed. To the public, Brandy's image was polished, wholesome, and controlled, an example held up for an entire generation. Behind the scenes, the pressure was suffocating. In later interviews, Brandy has spoken openly about battling severe depression, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion during her early years of fame. The demand to remain perfect vocally, visually, and personally created isolation rather than confidence. Alcohol and prescription drugs entered her life not as excess, but as a way to quiet intrusive thoughts and escape constant scrutiny. The toll soon became visible to those closest to her. Brandy has described moments of deep detachment sitting alone in hotel rooms, surrounded by pills and alcohol, writing in journals about wanting the pain to stop. Friends intervened quietly as professional commitments were disrupted by emotional collapse. These admissions came directly from Brandy herself, reframing the narrative around mental health rather than spectacle or rumor. Recovery required honesty and distance from the machine that made her famous. Through therapy, sobriety, and setting boundaries, Brandy rebuilt stability before tragedy struck. Her return to music and acting came with greater self-awareness and restraint, not denial. Brandy Norwood's story is not about downfall. It's about how unchecked pressure can nearly erase even the brightest light, and how choosing health over perfection can preserve a life as well as a legacy. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday wasn't created by fame. She was shaped by survival. Long before the world called her a legend, she was a young black woman carrying trauma, poverty, and exploitation that would have broken most people. Yet from that pain came a voice so intimate it felt like truth spoken out loud. In the 1930s and 1940s, she transformed jazz with a style built on emotion rather than perfection. Every phrase sounded like a confession, and when she recorded Strange Fruit, she didn't just sing a song, she forced America to stare directly at racial violence through music without comfort or escape. But the same world that praised her talent rarely protected her humanity. Billie moved through an industry where powerful men controlled money, venues, and access, while a black woman could be admired on stage and discarded off it. Her private life was marked by unstable relationships, exploitation, and constant pressure to keep performing no matter how broken she felt. Addiction didn't arrive as glamour, it arrived as anesthesia. It was a way to numb memories that never stopped haunting her, especially in an era where therapy and real support were not offered to someone like her. Do you think Billie Holiday would have lived longer if she had received treatment and compassion instead of punishment and stigma? The consequences became brutal and public. In 1947, Billie was arrested for drug possession and sent to prison, and that conviction destroyed her stability. She lost her cabaret card, legally blocking her from performing in many New York clubs and cutting off the income she depended on. While others were quietly helped behind closed doors, Billie was criminalized, treated like a problem to be erased, instead of a human being in crisis. Even as her health declined, she kept working because stopping meant disappearing. By 1959, her body was exhausted from years of damage pressure and relentless scrutiny. Billie Holiday died on July 17, 1959, at only 44 years old. Her music remains immortal, but her ending is a warning. America celebrated black brilliance, yet too often punished black pain. In the end, these women weren't weak. They were carrying weight most people never see. Fame gave them applause, headlines, and pressure, but it didn't always give them protection, healing, or peace. Some fought back and rebuilt. Others didn't live long enough to escape the damage. And that's the uncomfortable truth. The Black Excellence List refuses to ignore addiction isn't always the main villain. Sometimes it's the symptom of a system that profits from talent while neglecting pain. So let me ask you, should Hollywood be held accountable for these collapses, or do we blame the individual no matter what?